So, for our public that's here,
Hi, public.
everybody should have 3 sheets here, right here. There's one which has the agenda on it, and there's another one that is the minutes of what we did at the previous meeting that was on March 27th. And there's another sheet which shows it addresses the issue of civics education. I thought today, looking at our agenda, that we have a number of issues on our plate here. We specifically have the ED 306 rules, which we've been looking at, and I'd like to have a discussion on those as well. Then we also have on number 5 on that agenda, civics education, and I put that on there seeing that it has been approved in HB2 now, the $1 million to develop a textbook on civics education K through 12. And I wanted folks to know exactly where the statutory language that we have in place right now in New Hampshire law came from. And it came from the state of Ohio. And I have the civics education format and formula, everything they have in Ohio, and it parallels exactly what we put in the statute here, and I'll explain all that. Mental health is another issue which I think is a very important issue in the state right now. And we're looking at input from our school districts that it seems to be a topic that's explosive, that we have a number of students which are displaying health issues. And we have 3 bills which we have retained in House Education regarding that topic. And whether the concern that I'd like to talk about today on that one is, where do we place that? Do we place it if we do something with it in 193E under adequacy or under studies or as a part of health and wellness? That's a conversation which we might be able to get some sense of direction on. Then I have under 7 other, and I'd like to do right now is, does everybody know everybody up here at the table? Yeah, you're good with that. All right, so I'd like to approve the agenda, and at this time, if there's something else that people would like to put on this, let's get it on, add it to the agenda. There's a lot here. Not seeing anything else being added?
Like it's adequate.
Okay, great. Then is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So
Okay, motion made by the Senator Ward and second by Representative Cordelli. Now, we have the minutes from the previous meeting, and we had nobody taking minutes, so I wrote some minutes up briefly on that. I think we ought to look at that, and maybe if somebody wants to take minutes, they're welcome to do so, or we continue to do it this way. You haven't had a chance to read any of that. I think everybody should take a moment or two to read them over, to see if it's reflective or see if it really states some of what we discussed. There's summary notes. Are there any comments here?
Okay to me.
I'm okay with the minutes.
Anything to my right?
Need a motion to approve?
You're making one. Okay, Representative Cordelli made a motion to approve. Is there a second? Second. Okay. Any discussion on the minutes? All those in favor? It's unanimous. Okay, so we can put the minutes aside and get into the order in which we want to address some of the issues in front of us here today. The first one I noted on the docket for today is ED 306, preliminary minimum standards for public school approval. And as you'll note on the bottom of the agenda, there are the dates for the hearings that Fred Bramante is presenting regarding ED 306 to locales. I guess the first thing I'd like to ask, is there anybody that has attended? Well, I plan on doing the last one in Concord. But is there any feedback? Yes, Representative Luno.
Sure, thanks. Thanks, Rick. Mel and I actually attended one several weeks ago over at Bow High School, and we were a little surprised about how the presentation went. We know Fred Bramante pretty well, and I know he's certainly committed to strong student outcomes for New Hampshire public school students, but he didn't really spend much time talking about the proposed changes, nor what the effects would be in terms of outcome. He talked a lot about background, and maybe this committee could provide Mr. Bramante with some feedback. Only as it looks like that there's the next meeting coming up is scheduled for June 27th, and then it goes into September. And I think he was going to have like 20 or so of these forums, but and I'm not trying to be critical in a negative way, but in a way that I think would be helpful in terms of disseminating information that's material to the proposed changes, so that Fred can get the critical feedback he's looking for from from people who attend these sessions.
Was there a lot of good input coming in, or was there not good input coming in?
In my perspective is it lacked any sort of detail on what the proposed changes were, and it sort of spent more time on the background that led to the changes or leading to the proposed changes, as opposed to what the proposed changes are, and he did get some feedback that from some members in the audience, that some people in the audience that sort of suggested, hey, a little bit more detail on what the proposed changes are would be helpful.
Was there any discussion regarding some of those changes in terminology of competencies versus proficiency and mastery?
No, or expectations.
Yeah.
There wasn't that type of discussion, and Mel and I have had conversations with Fred one-on-one on that. Mel, maybe you want to.
Yeah, I followed up on that conversation. I had a conversation with Fred following the Bow meeting, and gave him some suggestions on being a little more substantive. I mean, Fred wants to hear from people. There's no question that's his intent. But there was no opportunity really to provide the kind of feedback that I thought he was really looking for. And I gave him several suggestions on how to open up the sessions. Now, subsequent to that, we've gotten feedback from some of our committee members that went to the one in Kearsarge. And also there was one in Keene that followed the Bow meeting. And my feedback we've been getting is that it's basic. He hasn't changed much of his presentation, which is unfortunate, because I think this is his goal is to get feedback. But I don't believe, from what I'm gathering, he's not getting a lot of feedback because of how he's presenting it. And I wish that he would be a little more definitive on laying out what the changes are, and then getting feedback from what he's saying to people. I don't believe that's coming. I know, Patty, you were.
I went to the one June 5th at Memorial, and it was almost 45 minutes of a PowerPoint of why the history of this going back to 1995, the things that came out in 2007, what our competencies are as opposed to just getting pass or fail or getting grades, mastery versus proficiency, and then any questions? And like nobody in the audience had been told anything about what was in the 306 changes.
So there's no discussion regarding acknowledgement versus mastery?
I had the side by side because
Yeah.
we had, and I asked the question about that I was concerned with shells being changed to mays in may provide from shall provide. And my only answer was, it's good to be flexible. So really, and I know that he did a presentation for the Manchester School Board, who wrote him, I guess, pages of their concerns and suggestions, and he did acknowledge that. But he also said, it's nice to get suggestions for changes, but, you know, you don't know if they're gonna happen. So,
Were the sessions well attended or,
We had 25 in both.
oh, okay.
about 30 in Manchester.
Okay.
But it was school board members, elected officials, and one person in the audience brought up, this is very nice and the way you explain everything, but if you're just a regular old parent that's not involved in any of this, you don't know what you're talking about. We don't understand what you're talking about at all. So, I mean, even the presentation of the way it is, it's presented so that people who are involved in education can understand it, but your parent who has kids going to school and that's their involvement with education doesn't understand this.
Was there any reference at all to the, when we have the individual subject areas identified within our rules, be it mathematics, physical education, health, there's also elements underneath which try to define those skills and that knowledge, that study. There's a gap that's been taken out of these rules. Was there any comment regarding that?
Not that I recall.
Huh.
I mean, it would be nice if Fred had the side by side, because I think that really, that provides some sense of background to what the change, whether you agree with them or not is irrelevant. The point is, this is what they are. And I think that's why when we got them from the committee standpoint, that was very instructive to begin to look at that. And I just don't, none of that. And I'm concerned because there were, at least in Bo, and I'm assuming that the others, there were members of the committee or whatever they called themselves that created this. There were members of them there, but they didn't seem to be engaged at all in the process. And I was hoping that some of them would be able to give further feedback to Fred about, well, you need to think about this or whatever. But it doesn't seem that the basic format, at least at this point in time, has really changed that much, because I did do a follow-up on when he went to Keene. He went from Bow to Keene the next night, and to see if he'd made any changes in that. And from what I understand, it was basically the same presentation. So I'm concerned that I don't think he's getting what I think his intent is trying to find it.
And Rick?
Yeah.
I think it would also be important to, during these public sessions for Mr. Bravante to talk about how the flexibility that he's suggesting and that Patty referenced, how that could manifest in terms of different versions of public school. And to be able to meet a flexible minimum standards or be compliant with a flexible minimum standards document, and be able to say, well, in this community, public school could look like this, and in this other community, public school could look like this, and rather than just using the term flexible, I think people have I know I have a better, easier time understanding if you can sort of fit a hypothetical into that and say, well, now I see what this looks like. Now I see what that could look like. taking people through some of those examples, I think, could be very helpful.
How did this really impact local control in terms of my district being able to say we're going to have 24 required credits to get out of here, versus 20 here in this one? Are these new standards, proposed draft standards, laying up against that ability? The graduation requirements set by the local, which they have the right to do now, and there's also requirements of the state, which we've identified through rule. Is there that flexibility being taken, or is it, do you know?
Yeah, I don't think that was discussed, but I think that would be that's an example of a hypothetical that I think would help members of the public really understand what's being, and would help us too, understand what's being proposed.
Would it help if we invite Fred to this meeting, or one of our meetings, and we have more folks here, so we could have I think we're more in tune with rules.
Sure.
Rules every day,
Sure.
just about we're looking at.
I think that makes a lot of sense, Rick. I would definitely giving him time to sort of prepare and understand what our interests are going to be in that meeting, and
I think identifying what Representative Myler said, lay out the changes.
yeah.
And I think what has he found? I mean, by the time we would have him come here, I would assume sometime in the fall.
Yeah.
What has he found? What's the feedback that he's getting from them? And what are some of the suggested changes that the committee may be looking at as they begin to deal with their final draft going forward to the.
Now, it's not our requirement we don't approve the minimum standards of public school approval. Those are certainly State Board of Education responsibility. But it certainly does impact, there may not be a direct linkage with our academic standards and the subject areas and the criteria and the substance criteria which we have for an adequate education, but there's a linkage. And I remember when we put health and wellness. The wellness came out of the ED 306 and supported our changing it in our opportunity for an adequate education, that substantive criteria. That's where we got the word wellness, and we're able to really substantiate it because that's what people are doing. So I think there is a linkage, and I think we have a good position to be requesting him to come and discuss with us. How do you feel about that,
Well,
Sam?
I didn't even know about these meetings, so I couldn't go to any one of them, although I would have, because quite a few of them are within easy driving distance.
Yeah, right.
So I will have to go to the September 12th one.
And I think, Ruth, that's one of the issues, that I think he's had a problem in the advertising of these meetings coming forth. I think in most cases, they would have been through a local school newsletter or from the superintendent and the school districts that they're in. But the actual statewide thing, there's not been a lot of hype around,
Right.
you need to get to see these and hear the places you can go. So I'm sorry that you just saw these because they have been out, but they've been not widely known.
Yeah.
Well, the last one should be good because they've received all your input.
Well, that's why I was selecting the
Hopefully, yeah,
last one to go to. But the rules, they were last adopted back in 2015. That's when we changed them. And every 10 years.
Yeah.
And so we're rolling in on 2025. So I think that's what they're trying to prepare for here. When would be a good time for us to try, maybe we're jumping it when we'd have our next meeting, but if Fred's able to come, we ought to try to, and give us some information regarding these changes and what he's getting as feedback from those schools, and side-by-side information. I think that'd be very helpful for us and for him.
Sometime in mid-September or something like
Okay,
that.
yeah.
If the last one is September
Yeah,
12th,
mid-September, yeah.
then give him time
Yeah.
to,
Or even early October. I mean,
Right, yes.
yeah.
Okay.
I'm not sure when these are, do we know the date that they're supposed to go to the state board?
I think after all of his hearings,
Yeah.
anyway.
Because I think what happens is that, to the state board's credit, when they did receive the initial draft, they basically moved it aside for these hearings to take place before they actually started that 60-day process for the actual foreclosure.
They said 180 days.
180. So there's time here. It's just, we just want to make sure by the time they get to the state board that there's been a reflective period of time on the draft.
So then mid-September, early October, I think we'd be in line to have him come in and do a presentation for us. Are we all good with that request? Good. Is there any need to stay on the issue of ED 306 at this time? No. Okay. Jumping down to the next one, which we have, which is civics education. And I have, on the large packet, where there's a 63, that's item 63 within the HB2. And this is the language which appears in law that's underlined, which stipulates that there's going to be the sum of $1 million for fiscal year ending June 30, 2023, which shall not lapse, for the purpose of developing and creating a New Hampshire civics textbook to be distributed to every New Hampshire civics classroom. So I'm assuming that this will probably get signed into law. I think there's a really good chance, seeing the governor, when in his presentation, has civics as an issue that needs to be addressed. So then what I've done is I've put into this packet of materials information starting, let's see, on like page 3, the results of the NAEP, and I think we're all very familiar with the results of NAEP. This is information which is posted on the DOE website, that the nationwide, we did very poorly in terms of civics education, therefore HB2. So that information is available. I don't think there's necessary to get into a lot of that. That's there for your information. So jumping ahead to page 7, now I want to just explain that within statute, and in statute is on page, it's stapled to the back side of your agenda. There's 189:10 says studies. See, that's that part. Let's see. No, that's all regarding the second one. We do have, it's the part that's dealing with, or maybe it's in this packet.
Yeah,
It's in this packet. It's on page 8. If we go to page 8, that's what I'm looking for. 189:11, instruction in national and state history and government. And we have in our statute right now, A through J. Those are areas of study dealing with the United States and New Hampshire government civics course. At a minimum, the course shall include instruction in these A through J areas. And this is for information. The first item there, you can see opportunities and responsibilities for civic involvement. If you look at page 10 of this document that I have before you here, this comes out of the plan from the state of Ohio, which adopted their model social studies curriculum in 2019. Senator D'Alessandro and I put these A through, not J, but A through I into statute back around 2017-18, when this was still draft. But this has since been adopted by Ohio. But Ohio has 4 basic strands in their social studies program. It goes history, government, geography, and economics. Those are the strands. Within the government strand, there is a civic involvement strand. And you can see that the content statement, opportunities for civic engagement with instructors of government, are made possible through political and public policy process. And we have opportunities and responsibilities for civic involvement. We modified language a little bit, but they're similar. If you went down to item B, and that's found on on pages 10 through 11. B says skills to effectively participate in civic affairs. That's what this is all about right there. So we took that, political parties, interest groups, and media provide opportunities for civic involvement through various means. That's in the Ohio plan. On C, it's reflected on 12 and 15. C says the U.S. Constitution and principles stated in the Articles of Amendment of the United States Constitution that provide the foundational democratic government of the United States. That is right there on pages 12, in that we just stole it right directly from Ohio. And same thing for E, where we're supposed to be talking about the structure and function of three branches comprising federal state governments, legislative, judicial, and executive. If you look at page 16 in the Ohio model, you can see it talks directly about the three branches of government. Another thing we just took from that state. They had put their model together with consultants, with teachers, with people teaching it, with various associations. It was a task force put together to develop this curriculum that they have. And then going on down to the next one, F, the role, opportunities, and responsibilities of citizens to engage in civic activity. If you go to page 18, you can see that there it says, in the United States, people have the rights to protect them from undue government interference. Rights carry responsibilities that help define how people use the rights and require the respect for the rights of others. And they talking about engagement. And that's item number 15 in their content statement. So we took that one as well. On G, where it says the role of interactions of state of New Hampshire and local governments within the framework of the United States Constitution. Obviously, we didn't take Ohio's but they do have that on page 1920. We just have written in New Hampshire that we want to be also teaching about civics on the local level and the state level, and which is on H, how federal, state, and local governments address problems and issues, making decisions, creating this. And you can see item 20, page 21. They also have that as individuals and organizations play a role within federal, state, and local governments in helping determine public, domestic, and foreign policy. And it speaks to it a little bit down below on item 20 in theirs as well. And also the last one, I, the role and actions of government in the flow of economic activity and regulation of monetary policy. That came specifically on theirs on page 22. You can see the Federal Reserve System uses monetary tools to regulate the nation's monetary supply and moderate the effects of expansion and contraction in the economy. And they talk about the feds in that system. So we took this. Now, I also took a little bit of time and went through and say, okay, what are they doing in terms of civics education for all the grades? And they have taken, and you can see on page 23, children continue to build on their understanding of chronological timelines and calendars that are introduced in grade 2. This is the grade 1 social studies curriculum which they had in Ohio. And every grade level they carve out civics within government. And it's something that maybe we ought to be looking at when we're developing a textbook. I know it's not our responsibility to do that. I didn't understand within HB2 where it says the Department of Education, Commission on New Hampshire Civics. Commission on New Hampshire Civics. Who's on that commission? I've never heard of it.
What was the name of that group that came and presented to us together?
That was that's New Hampshire Civics. I don't know if it's a commission.
I don't think so.
That's a nonprofit.
That's a nonprofit.
Yeah.
So I don't know who's going to be writing this thing. appropriated to the Department of Commission, New Hampshire Civics, established in RSA 21N8C. I went and looked at it. There is no 28C. Unless it's in HB2 somewhere. Some of $1 million. So in writing this thing, I think it's important that, because this is going to impact our responsibility for oversight on this area, which is within an adequate education.
Couple comments. I think.
Yeah.
One, the executive director of New Hampshire Civics has resigned, Martha Madsen, and she's left. They do have an interim acting there. So and that organization primarily deals a lot with social studies teachers, et cetera. The other thing is that there is an organization that's, I've been tangentially in contact with, and that is they're working on civics and civility, which is dealing with the primary election. And again, Mr. Bramante has been the key factor in that, and it's the design of that is to try to do exactly what this is doing, only from a political standpoint as far as the election goes. It's a bipartisan effort to engage students not only in this state, but across the country, actually, to be engaged in the primary election. But there's a whole program that they're developing that's a lot of this content that's here, Rick, that leads up to the primary election, where students from across the region and across the country can get involved in this. And they're moving right along, and they've got sponsors, and they're developing programs, curriculum that would provide engagement of students in this process, that with the culmination of it basically being engaging with candidates that are running for the presidential election. So those are just two things that directly relate to the civic stuff.
The reason why I bring this topic up, if you look on the agenda on the backside, there's some statutory language on page 2 of the agenda there. And it's 193E2-A, substantive educational content of an adequate education. Civics is listed under 4. So it's our responsibility. I see these as standards of what we teach, academic standards, subject areas. Correct me if I'm mistaken, but so then somehow, if we're getting down and we're now going to be contracting out somebody to do it, I have no problem with that. I have no problem with other groups getting involved and writing this, but they've always come back for approval. They have to come back for approval by the state board and the state board. But if it comes to academic standards, the Legislative Oversight Committee is responsible for reviewing and recommending. Correct me if I'm wrong in that one.
No, I think
No.
that's right out of the statute.
That's right on statute.
I do have a question though with respect to page 8, part H, which is which you've got reference to the Ohio page 132, which is 21 at page 21 in this packet. I'm not quite sure I'm seeing the direct reference to Ohio's plan as it relates to how federal, state, and local governments address problems and issues by making decisions, creating laws, enforcing regulations, and taking action. Because that's sort of the full.
Yeah. I'm not trying to say we need to be using Ohio at all. I'm just trying to show that this is the historical background of how we got to where we did.
Right. I think having a model from another state is sort of helpful when looking at how you go about defining these various academic standards in a way that doesn't take a partisan slant, because civics can sort of easily fall into that trap. And H, I think, is particularly interesting because it basically references how the three branches of government operate to address problems and issues by making decisions: executive, creating laws; legislative, enforcing regulations; executive, and taking action. That would be a combination of executive and judicial. And it'd be great if Ohio had something that sort of spoke to
Yeah, see, they talk about those the three branches at all levels addressing public policy issues that arise domestic and international. That's on page 20.
21 talks about more of like the public's
Yeah,
ability
yeah,
to engage in government.
Yeah,
At the top of page 21, and then
19, yes, I'm looking at it.
yeah, and then 20. At the bottom of page 21, number 20, seems to be more of a legislative policy.
Explain how the federal government uses.
But not how the government addresses problems.
Yes, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And issues.
Mhm.
And obviously, I think that's a big thing, is what we're seeing play out with the news from last week too. And I'm not trying to make it
Yeah.
political here,
Yeah.
but it doesn't help when people get up and say, the weaponization of the Department of Injustice. And that doesn't help.
Well, I think we're just going to have to, that's hopefully what we would do with a good civics program, is we would teach people about civics and how to engage and try to get resolution in a meaningful, lasting manner.
Right.
So I know there's a lot of different civics programs out there, but I'm just wanting to just try to figure out.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I
Yeah.
just printed out, this is a copy of that commission in the,
Okay,
from the budget, if that would be helpful for you guys.
so that was in HB2?
Yeah,
The commission's in
it
there.
has like the textbook stuff follows.
All right, everybody needs to have a
It's just
copy.
like an excerpt on the front and back of that page. There should be sticker there. Thank you, Jim.
Okay,
Which established.
It just hasn't made it into the book yet.
yeah, well, yeah, it's, yeah. I was looking at one section, HB2, this is another section.
This part right here, on the other side of that,
It's interesting that
the commission.
this also talks about the textbook and even a paper copy of the textbook, whereas, correct me if I'm wrong, Senator Ward, but there was a lot of discussion about this textbook during the Senate budget hearings.
There
And
was.
there was an amendment put forward by Senator D'Alessandro to cut the $1 million because he didn't think that a textbook was actually required. And I think the other side of that coin that Senator Bradley talked about was that it didn't necessarily have to be a paper text, but could be digital. Because there were concerns about the cost of doing a hard copy textbook and distributing it to all the schools and everything else. So I think that that's a question that will play out as we go forward in terms of the $1 million and what kind of textbook we are actually looking at producing.
There was a lot of discussion, and I think with it, if you have a digital book, you can go in easily and make the changes, whereas with a printed book, you have to, reprint it and redistribute it. So,
I attended that meeting on that Friday that when finance, that's the one where Senator Gray and Senator Bradley, et cetera, and then Senator D'Alessandro and Cindy were there. I can remember Senator Lou D'Alessandro questioning, okay, if we're going to have a textbook, who's going to print it? Who, all the costs associated with it, who's going to write it, et cetera. And he was advocating for the people that are the social studies teachers, organizations, et cetera, to be contributors to this process. And when it was cut to $1 million, then he said, well, I don't know if we're going to be able to do it for $1 million if we're talking about everybody, the 160,000 kids with a textbook. And of course, and one textbook's not going to be good for, grade 6 and grade 10 or 11. There's different contents in terms of civics and how you present it and topics, and it has to be a scope and sequence type affair. So I think he was coming from his perspective of being a social studies teacher. And he alluded to the flying folks that he has had in his classes and that he has taught. And he said that he's a textbook person. But I think that when then the commissioner spoke up and said, well, we can do this digitally with $1 million, and trying to, I think, even try to protect the money for the whole program. So it's an issue which I think is still up in the air. I know you see a written copy here, but I'm confused on that myself. I've gone through this process. I did it for the state of Maine. And we had a textbook for the civics in the 4th grade, because that was where we taught Maine studies. And we had civics and families, knowing this is how many dollars you have, this is what you can afford to spend, and the kids learn that concept. Then in the middle school, there was not a textbook. There was teacher's guide with a lot of opportunity for activities which should be pursued, showing the goals and the objectives of the program and where the resources were available. And then we did the same thing for specific courses within the high school. For the lower grades, there was only a book for grades 2, 3, and 4, and later on at the upper end of the elementary school. So I think that we need to really filter through this and find out just how this is going to be done. And we ought to have some input on that too, because there's nobody on this commission that's from the legislature.
Yeah,
there are.
Are there?
Two members of the House.
Two members of the House, okay.
And one Senate, yeah.
And one in the Senate.
Jane Kay.
So Rick,
Yeah.
on the on what you started talking about on the HB2 page 18 of what Jen just handed out, line 8, for the purpose of creating a New Hampshire civics textbook to be distributed, ... is part of the question here what that means? Could that be interpreted as K-12 curriculum?
I don't know.
Yeah. Grade appropriate or
Grade appropriate.
or skill appropriate curriculum that could be that serves as the curriculum used in all public schools. I don't think there's a hard definition of civics textbook to be distributed in here. So, because I agree with what Senator Ward was saying and what Representative Cordelli was saying, that what you're putting in front of a 4th grader is potentially quite different from what you're putting in front of a 11th grader.
It says to every New Hampshire civics classroom. Does that put a limit on which classrooms get it? It's a civics classroom.
Doesn't mean high school.
What does that mean?
Well, there's a required course in civics.
Mhm.
So is that the one they're talking about?
Does that mean the textbook only goes to that civics classroom?
So the printed copy will be in each classroom, but not necessarily to each child, is how I see this.
But I think the intent here was to create an ongoing, really, K-12
Yeah.
program with varying components of it that's age specific. And so, I mean, you know, for example, I remember, I think somebody was talking about like in the lower L grades, the mere fact of doing some collaborative decision making is part of a civics initiative.
Yeah.
Of how do you make decisions? How do you solve problems? That is that's a component. It's not a government issue, but it's a dealing with the civility and how do you engage in decision making. So I think I would hope the commission would begin to look at not just a textbook, but what kinds of activities and what kinds of curriculum that's available throughout the spectrum, dependent upon what the age level of the student happens to be. So every year, you're not just dealing with a fourth grade program,
Yeah.
but every year there's something that's going to be engaging the students in some kind of a civics activity.
Well, it says create a textbook and related curriculum.
Exactly right. The related curriculum, I think it's what's critical here. And I think the whole issue of online stuff is important too, because in this program, there's a lot of video that's available that could also be used. That's not printed material. And I'm not downgrading printed material, but with how youth today is so engaged in the video world, it would seem to me that has got to be part of a foundational piece of the program.
Video of Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech.
Exactly right. Yeah. We have, for example, I was sharing with Martha Madsen, those of us that had worked on the 18-year-old vote, we now have a 55-minute video that basically talks about how those of us that were involved in this thing organized it, lobbied it, and then engaged in the whole voter registration. And I mean, I think she's going to be using that with her social studies groups when they have their annual meeting in the fall. So I mean, it's that kind of activity I think that's important.
Okay. So I think that the primary thing I try to achieve today, I think I've done that, is that where our current language came from, it came from basically from Ohio.
Yeah.
Now, where we go, I guess it's up to that commission.
And I think one of the assessments will be that next time when you have to get the curriculum going here,
Yeah.
you'll be able to see whether or not there's an improvement in the results of the test scores on this.
Well, that goes to the other question I think I had listed there, somewhere in that. There's accountability. Yeah, how to measure improvement and assessment under 5A on the agenda. Is that going to be locally developed, or is that going to be something which is developed by that commission?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, so I think something that's important to reference on this too is the DOE's news release, which you've got copied on page 3.
Yeah.
And it goes to say that nationwide, average scores declined in in U.S. history and civics for 8th graders compared to 2018, with civics scores declining for the first time since the assessment began in 1998. And so this is specific to the 2022 NAEP. And obviously, there's a lot going on in the 2020, 2021, and 2022 NAEP, because of COVID. And I think would one of the objectives of the commission also be to understand what contributed to the decline in which clearly bucks the trend that of improved results since the beginning of assessment back in 1998. I mean, was it curriculum? Was it COVID? Was it something else?
Well, it's hard to tell from these NAEP scores here. I'd like to find out what's going on in our own state.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the NAEP scores track to the state too, so we could see how New Hampshire did on this, not just nationwide averages.
And the state's never really been in the business of an assessment for social studies. We haven't been doing that. That's been relegated to the local. And then we have, well, we're going to assess the performance based upon the immigration test. And of course, there's also within our statute, the provision, I don't know if I even put that statute in here, where there's a local competency test for social studies also offered. I think I may not have put that. Yeah, let's see. Wait a minute. Yeah, it says right here on page 9, as a component of instruction under paragraph 1, a locally developed competency assessment of the United States government and civics that includes, but is not limited to. I've never seen any of those results. Is it possible for this group, for us to even find out how we're doing on that locally developed assessment? And what is their developed competency assessment? How that is that being done in schools? Or I don't know if it's being done or not.
Is that local assessment sent on to the department at all?
Yeah, it seems
That's not specified in there, it doesn't look like.
What about that last sentence? On June 30th, each of the school
Yeah,
districts
that's-
shall submit the results.
Yeah, that's just the immigration.
that's the immigration test.
But not local.
But we don't know
competencies.
how they're doing on their local competency test for social studies.
But if they take the immigration test, they don't also have to take the other one. It's
That's
a-
right.
So they may not.
That's true.
So that might skew the results
Right.
too. So it's either.
You talk about local, you talk about local each state, or we talk about each municipality,
Each district, I think.
Each district,
Yep.
each school district.
yeah. See, it says that that local assessment shall be administered to students as part of the required high school course in history and government. Or is it possible to find out how students are doing on that locally developed assessment? We gave this authority to these school districts when we said it's no longer a statewide assessment. That was back early on under Ginny Berry.
I have a meeting with Melissa White of the department on Wednesday, so I could ask her about it at that point.
Yeah, whether they are familiar with this or
Right.
any information provided to them. If not, I'd even just like to see what those locally developed assessments look like. I don't need to see the results. I just like to see that'd be good for that commission to have a beat on it. I think accountability is really important. We oftentimes put money into doing something, but we don't get the results of whether it makes any difference or not. Is the committee supportive put a request into the department to see if they can acquire, if they don't have those locally developed assessments, so we could see them, have them available?
Mm-hmm.
Sure, yeah.
I'd like to see it.
I would.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, so we will ask that.
I'm having a hard time finding the civics NAEP data, state level.
And I hear you speaking about the NAEP data
Mhm.
for civics. Is that broken down by state?
I'm trying to find, it must be.
Yeah.
It is for other subjects. I'm not sure
Yeah,
about civics.
but I'm
I
just
would
not
think
finding it on civics.
Yeah.
I've seen it on the other
Math
subjects.
and English and everything,
And looking at the department's, a more, closer read of the department's short news release here, it's referencing nationwide trends, not which aren't necessarily reflective of statewide trends.
I think it'd also be interesting to see if they receive all these reports from the school districts by June 30.
Pretty close.
We're right there.
It's always an issue, isn't it?
Yeah. It's probably just like the emergency operation plans, 20% came in.
Yeah.
No sense writing this stuff in law.
So could we ask the department for the statewide, if those are available?
Yep.
Yeah.
Statewide, Nate.
Yeah, or not, I'm sorry, not statewide, by district.
Yeah,
Oh.
ask for the local
Yeah.
tests.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Ask for the state NAEP
NAEP,
results.
right.
And ask for, the Citizenship and Immigration Services test.
Yeah.
So there's three things we're requesting out of this law.
And as granular, we
Yeah.
should be able to get it right down to we don't need student data,
Yeah.
but we need district data.
Yeah.
And if it can be, the NAEP data on a national basis is also categorized by what's the term? Disaggregated groups. Did I get that right?
Yeah, by
Like different
subgroups like we do for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if that's available
Yeah.
by district.
Okay. What I'll do is I'll write a letter and CC it to everybody on the committee here, on the committee, and send it to the commissioner, also to the state board.
That's good. That'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah, and I'll get that done right after this. Okay. Any more discussion on the civics? Okay. Page 9. Okay, we'll get that done. That'll help us. So we're going to write this letter. We also have the request of Fred Bermonti for late September, mid-September, October. Let's go on to the next item on our docket here, which is down below under mental health. I think this needs some discussion. Want to get here. Okay, where are we? Under our current ED rules, ED 306.40 under health education program. So that's attached to your agenda.
Yep.
I'm looking at the back page. It has listed mental health under 2G. See that? Okay, so that's listed as a component of our health education program, not as a separate. My question is that, and we'll have to know this because we have retained 3 bills. Are we going to go try to put this in the area of studies, like we've done other components of health and wellness, or are we going to insert it in as a requirement of adequacy as a separate, because it diverges from how we've addressed it as a state in the past. It's been a component underneath. And I quite honestly, I don't have a clear understanding what is mental. Mental. Why I bring this up today, I'm fearful of one thing, is when I was teaching as a principal back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, we had an issue which was, I think, came to everybody's attention, ADHD. And what do we do with this attention deficit disorder, which is hyperactive for some of the kids were always on the jig, really moving around and all. I had my own youngster like that. And so what was the thing that the school oftentimes said? Put them on Ritalin.
Yeah.
We had so many kids on Ritalin, and young Rick, we found out later his IQ was over 140. And this kid was supercharged up here in the head and was, just very active and sometimes very bored. And so I don't want to go down the route of having mental health being identified by folks which aren't properly trained to do that, the doctor, the psychologist, maybe the school counselor. Certainly, I as a teacher was not prepared to do that. I oftentimes look to special ed people because you start getting into the area of IEP. So we have within these bills the desire on one of them is to have a comprehensive mental health program. I don't know what quite that means. I think we retained it because there was some concern as definition, whether it should be placed into adequacy or put underneath studies. I agree, there seems to be issues going on in our schools right now. I hear it from so many professionals in the field. But there was a lot of discussion about ADHD too. And that's where we went with that. And we started prescribing things and discussing things that I don't think I had the expertise to be discussing. So I open that up for discussion right now, where we're going to go on it.
I think that you touched on special education. I think some of that mental health, what aspects of mental health qualify you for an IEP and special education. The government just defined HD as an issue that would qualify you for IDEA. What other things are we going down a path where maybe in some cases we're over qualifying students for special education, over identifying students for special education because of maybe anxiety or something else? That's something I'm interested in also.
I can remember my school psychologist I had when I was a young principal back in Gardner, Maine. And in those days, we were just coming into IDEA. And we were talking about behavior versus an emotional handicapping condition. And there's a difference there, which is environment. Your behavior can oftentimes be a result of something negative going on at home, or how the student is feeling. And so you see negative behaviors, which are contrary to what we want to see as the norm. But is that truly an IEP handicapping condition? I was told it wasn't. that it was something that could be supported through, you know, almost like a plan to help that particular child. It didn't have to be done through special ed.
I don't know that I was even thinking of these bills as having to do with special education or just more like kids being able to identify how they're feeling and saying, okay, I'm feeling really anxious today, or it's okay to feel like that if you're feeling it about something, or I'm really sad, and that, you know, and being able to talk to somebody about why am I feeling sad, or I don't know if I was putting those bills in a special education category. I didn't see them as
Not necessarily special ed, but
Oh.
is it part of adequacy or is it part of health? Which should be putting what you got, but change the statutory reference to studies. That's I guess where we put studies is in the sheet right there, and that's where we're talking about. Let's see, which one am I looking at here? Yeah, the school board shall ensure that health education, physical education to include importance of exercise and wellness are taught to pupils as part of, to include physiology, hygiene, health, interpersonal relationships, physical education. I'm not oppositional to put what you just discussed in where we have the other components of health. I just don't want to develop another category within the substantive criteria for an adequate education. That's, I think, where one of the bills lays it out to be in that area. Whereas it's more appropriate to stick language that you're proposing over underneath studies, 189.10.
So, Rick, I know we've in fact, the language in 189.10 shows amendments that were made over the last, I think, couple of cycles with the with interpersonal relationships and the personal finance literacy.
Yeah,
Arts.
and it also has things like abuse of children, human interactions.
I think that had been in there.
HIV, AIDS.
But I think you know, above Romans 1 and 2 and 3 is Roman 1, which talks about the Department of Education shall survey school districts biennially to receive reports on compliance with this section. And I don't know if this is the whole section, but I'm sure compliance with Roman 2 and Roman 3. And do we have copies of those reports from prior biennium? And I'm sort of wondering if the study isn't what students are studying, but what we're studying, how school districts are responding to Roman 2 and Roman 3.
When I had talked with Anthony, now Anthony's no longer with us. He's retired. He said that we haven't really defined what that category 189 versus 193
Right.
are. We sometimes we're loading up one when we shouldn't be loading up that one, we should be loading the other one up, and really clarify ourselves as to where we want to put these concentrated studies that are within these criteria that are not identified in 193. Where should we put those? And he was always suggesting to me, put them in 189. That's where we need to list this stuff, seeing that you have in your rules where mental health is part of your health.
Right. And so you've got under 193E, you've got 7, which is health and wellness, and 10, which is personal financial literacy. So those correspond to Roman 2 and Roman 3 of 189.10, and 2 and 3 clearly build out what is meant by health and what is meant by personal financial literacy. So maybe it's a good place to provide greater, I don't know, detail on what the legislature is looking for, and also to get a report.
Do you know, you're looking at ED 306 rules, because that's where all this stuff that we're looking at here appears in the 300 series. are these areas which specify, like I pointed on the backside of that sheet where it talks about alcohol and drug, injury prevention, nutrition, physical activity, family life, tobacco, mental health, etc. Are those being scratched from the new proposed rules? Is that the gap elements, which is the gap that the School Boards Association addressed?
It may be,
Yeah,
among other things,
yeah.
so.
I think we gotta be careful.
Yeah.
Because if we're losing it here, then we gotta make sure it's somewhere else. And we ought to be putting it underneath where we have all the rest of the health stuff and really load up the health section and do it properly. What's included within health and wellness?
Yeah, so could we ask the department for for maybe the last, I don't know, 3 reports that this section requires?
The department has a whole department of health and wellness that should have all of this. And aren't school districts supposed to be doing something with MTSSB, however they want to do it? I know Manchester has 2 directors of MTSSB, but I actually don't even know what they do.
Right.
But I know they have them. So I think there's something going on everywhere, but we just don't know what it is. But I think the department it's pretty much on top of it, because I've spoken to somebody there before and she knew everything that was going on in all the different places. And I can't remember. Do you know, Jen? I can't remember what her name is. Okay. Okay. Oh. Or there might not. Okay.
I'd go, Dave, it says at the top, the department shall survey school districts biannually. I'd go back 10 years.
Oh, I'm
And so we'd get 5 reports. And so you go back prior to COVID. And so your reports somebody's going to say, oh, that's just related to COVID. Let's go back as far as we can get.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think my concern is that I think the interest in this area has been spiked as we've come out of COVID. As we begin to see that there are a lot of students who are still reacting to their isolation during that period of time. I mean, we've done a lot of good work in the state dealing with special ed referrals, et cetera. That is not my interest in this area, because I do think there's a new interest that deals with how are we dealing with students who are struggling, because, I mean, we've heard reports of the lack of maturation on the part of some students that, like, 8th graders are really behaving at a 6th grade level. And so my concern is, what are the support systems in trying to ramp up? I mean, how long, I don't know the answer to this question, how long does it take a student or a young person who has been disengaged from social interactions with students where they would ordinarily have been maturing, didn't during that 2-year period of time? How long does it take, and what does it take to get them up to, I want to say grade level, but up to their age level, if you may, that they're behaving in a way that they should be behaving? And so as I look at this area here, notwithstanding what we talked about as far as reports, et cetera, what are the systems that are in place or need to be in place in school districts to expedite the students' maturation to their age level? I guess that's a way to put it. So that really is my concern as I look at this, and that's not necessarily what's the curriculum that's going to do it, but what are the experiences that would help them expedite their maturation. So that's kind of where I am on this particular topic.
Well, if we get any reports that they have going back at least 10
It'll give us
years,
some idea, yeah.
that will give us some basic information,
it
which
will.
is necessary. I'm inclined to believe that, you know, in my discussions with our superintendent we're on, other health impaired category IEP has grown.
Yep.
I, just by observing
Yep.
students, there's a change. I watched a graduation at the elementary school. It was a K through 8 just the other night. And I watched it the previous year too. There was a different feel this year because I think what's happening, we're seeing some of that catch up happening and developing. And I do believe that teachers are working real hard to try and get that to that level. I saw it with their band and choral program. It was really just outstanding. And it was, and of course, you know, as a teacher, every 3 years you get a crop of kids who maybe are not the ones that you think are exemplary.
Right, exactly.
And that happens. That's been going on for
Oh, yeah,
years.
yeah.
And so I used to have teachers who used to like take that 1 year to go out and get some training on the year that one was coming through. So I agree. I think we need to have mental health as part of and noted somewhere underneath our health and wellness program. But I say it like that, not as a separate program.
Yeah.
I think by saying it separately, I think it may get us into some territory we don't want to get into. Is the teacher now responsible for mental health as I perceive it and as I define it versus how you see it, Dave, and how you define it? They may be different.
But clearly it's part of health.
Yeah.
It's clearly part
I
of
mean,
health.
physical health and mental health
Yeah,
comprise health.
yeah. And
So, yeah.
it's just like within the social studies we talked about, we have geography, you have history, you have government, you have civics. Those are elements within. I guess I'm cautious in saying perhaps we shouldn't try to keep these individual elements as a separate entity in itself, as just trying to do like we did. We still call it social studies, but we have parentheses out beside it. What are those elements within?
Right.
That's what we should be doing, I think, with our health and wellness.
And I think using the word sometimes mental throws everything off, because it's not so much mental health, it's your overall good health. It's part of that. So I think when we say mental health, we immediately think of, you know, identifying kids or them having to go for whatever, and that's not necessary. It's not necessarily that. It's just, you know, just good health overall.
Well, health and wellness.
Health and
I think
wellness.
describes it pretty well.
But just using those words alone, I don't think does, because I think traditionally we've looked at health as being a physical thing. I mean, when you look at health insurance, it only up until recently has it really started to look at health above the neck. And in many cases, it still doesn't include, you know, teeth or eyes or stuff like that. I mean, it's sort of like everything the neck and below was well understood, and we have hospitals and doctors and things, but pretty much from the neck above, you're on your own, at least had been for a long time. And so I think as we understand that mental health is so important to your overall health, including your physical.
I think the way they had it in 306 or whatever part of this is, 306.40, they have mental health listed as part of the K through 12
Yeah.
program. It's a component of. It's like a chapter within the book, and only it transcends all the chapters. So I think that I'd like to see us hold to the way we've been doing it, but incorporate it into, and even if we feel necessary, I can support it, to even list it underneath the studies where we have health and wellness listed. We can put this component, define it
Right.
a little bit there, rather than putting it as a new section of inadequate education. I think that's where we're going to have a lot of reverse on.
Yeah. I think, and I think,
Yeah.
you know, building it out the way you've got it and way it is in the 306s where it does,
Yeah.
you know, specifically call out, maybe, it does specifically mention mental health, but maybe with a little bit more detail, behind it, you know, as this hasn't been updated in 10 years.
And you see, we
And we know
don't have
more.
frameworks which are guidance to our school districts anymore. So the rules are the only place people can walk to right now and see some of these elements within those subject areas.
Mhm.
If we take it out of 306, there's not going to be anything.
Right, right. And something that I think's, you know, directly related to G, and I'm not an expert in this, so I'm this, you know, this is, hopefully it's somewhat correct, is there's been a lot of discussion, certainly when I was on the school board, but I think we've had discussion around this committee too, in terms of adverse childhood experiences and how that contributes to mental health, and probably having some language in there that you know, speaks to the importance of understanding what those are,
Yeah.
you know, and how that's impacted a student. And
Yeah, I know it. I've gone through that with my own grandkids.
Sure.
And sometimes you say, suck it up, but they don't. That's a real hard thing for a kid to do when they're being throttled every day.
right,
And so I think this is a very important topic. I don't want to, you know, throw it aside. I'm not doing that. I'm just trying to make sure we do it properly.
so when we do talk about this in greater detail, could we get some folks in from maybe Holly Stevens, from NAMI, and maybe even consult with Senator Whitley on
I'd like to get some school psychologists in here and counselors in here too, and a nurse. Ruth, you're a nurse.
Not a child, not a pediatric nurse.
Yeah, right.
But we can have the person who just got the School Nurse of the Year award.
I think that's important as well.
Well, if there's someone at the department too that's running the health,
Yeah,
I'd like them to
Wellness
tell
office.
us what's going on. They know what's going on statewide. She sent me a chart. It actually was
Now, do
years
we
ago
want to do
now.
it here, or do we want to do that in the subcommittee, which we're going to be putting together?
That's my question.
I would, what I try to do is just get some clarification here, and I think I've gotten that the direction we ought to take today. That's given the direction which we can give the subcommittee.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be duplicating their.
We
Right.
changed
Yeah,
all-
sure.
we-
Yeah.
we painted 3 bills dealing with mental health, so we could get a better bead of how to handle it.
It's changed, you would say, school
do have a question.
may require.
Yeah.
Without the one. The proposed changes for 306 change that say the school board may require, so they could leave it out if they want to, if it's worded that way.
That'd be on a side by side when Fred comes here. I think we got to address all this stuff. Ruth, you had
I have a question. We just talked about getting reports from the last 10 years, and you pointed out that there was biennial, so it'd be 5 reports. But then it says here on the third sentence that the report shall be sent to the President of the Senate, Speaker of the House of Representatives, chairpersons of the Senate and House committees with jurisdiction over education. So Rick, did you ever get a report on this?
I can't honestly say yay or nay on that. I do get reports. I got the bullying report. I got the suspension expulsion report. See, they oftentimes come in the summertime, and you walk in, it's on your desk there, and so you oftentimes have to request them again.
Okay.
And so I think that's what we need to do. We need to request them again. Mel, did you ever get them?
Long time ago.
That's a long time ago. And that's right, exactly right.
So it's not something that is sent on a regular basis that we all know about.
They do send reports to us. A lot of times they come in during the summer months and it's just left on the desk. And then what happens is that change in leadership, change in party, different chairs. And so
Okay,
that all happens.
okay.
So if they were sent, we should be able to get copies of it very
That's right.
easily.
It should be available. We'll find that out.
That was my question.
Yeah, we will find out.
And those reports should also go to the study committee.
Pardon me?
The reports that come here should also go to the study committee.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. We'll direct them, because everybody will get a copy of everything we get coming back to us here. So, is there any further discussion on this topic? That's all we had on the docket for today. So we're gonna adjourn to a time to be announced at some later date?
Yeah.
And we know we will have something mid-September or October.
Good.
Okay,
All right.
Sarah,
Good.
Okay.
anything further? All in favor of adjourning?
All right.
Aye. Good. We're out of here. 11:30.
Good.
You have the meeting at 12, didn't you?
No, I have one at one.
No, we
Right.
got one back at 1. That's we got.
Yeah, right.
That school building aid one is an important meeting. We got Amy Clark coming over from DOE for that.
Okay, when is that?
It's right here.
It's
Is
a
that
school
well?
building aid
School
and
building.
charter.
Charter school, yes.
Okay,